I was in the kitchen, lost in the scent of sautéing vegetables, when I suddenly felt a presence behind me. Turning quickly, I found Alex, my stepson, standing there with an unsettling look in his eyes. "Is something wrong?" I asked, but his silence spoke volumes. Little did I know, this moment would spiral into a series of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about family and boundaries. My name is Lisa, a 42-year-old woman who always tries to balance life's complexities with a smile. People often describe me as confident and attractive, traits that seem to draw attention without effort. Married to Jack, I've built a seemingly stable life, though beneath the surface, it's not without its cracks. Jack, my husband, is hardworking and dependable but often consumed by his job. His long hours and the weight of his responsibilities leave little time for connection. While I know he loves me, the distance in our relationship grows during his frequent late nights in the garage or extended work trips. I've learned to fill the void with my own passions and hobbies, keeping myself busy while yearning for the closeness we once shared. Then there's Alex, my 18-year-old stepson. Quiet and reserved, he's always preferred the solitude of his room, often glued to his video games. Our relationship has been polite but distant, typical of a stepmother and stepson navigating the waters of a blended family. Despite living under the same roof, we rarely shared personal moments. I never thought much about it, chalking it up to the natural space teens create as they grow. On this particular Sunday, everything seemed normal. Jack was in the garage tinkering with his tools, and Alex was upstairs, presumably engrossed in his latest game. I was preparing dinner, my hands busy chopping vegetables while a soft tune played in the background. Life, though imperfect, felt routine, predictable even. But that sense of normalcy was shattered the moment Alex appeared in the kitchen. His sudden presence, his hesitant demeanor, and the way his eyes searched mine struck an unfamiliar chord. There was something different about him that day, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as he opened up about feeling lonely in the house. Had I been too preoccupied to notice his struggles? That night, I decided I'd make more of an effort to connect with him, not realizing that this seemingly simple decision would lead to an emotional journey I never anticipated. It started subtly, small moments that, at first, seemed innocuous. Alex's words from that Sunday lingered in my mind. "Sometimes I feel lonely in this house." I had brushed them off with promises to spend more time together, but his gaze that evening told a deeper story, one I couldn't quite decipher. In the days that followed, Alex's behavior changed. He started spending more time around me, often finding reasons to be in the kitchen or the living room when I was there. At first, I welcomed it. After all, hadn't I decided to foster a better bond between us? But soon, his attention began to feel different, too focused, too intense. His casual glances turned into lingering looks, and his questions about my day became oddly personal. One evening, while I was folding laundry in the living room, Alex sat down beside me. "Lisa," he began, his tone soft, almost vulnerable, "do you ever feel like you're not really seen? Like people just look past you?" His question caught me off guard. I paused, unsure of how to respond. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I try to focus on the people who matter." "Why do you ask?" He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine. "I feel like you see me." "Really see me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A strange unease crept into the room, mingling with the warmth of his words. I smiled awkwardly, brushing it off as a teenager's search for connection, but the intensity in his gaze left me unsettled. As the days went on, these moments became more frequent. Alex would find excuses to touch my hand briefly, his fingers lingering a second too long. He started sitting closer to me during movie nights, his presence almost magnetic. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but the unease grew stronger. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I felt his hand inching closer to mine along the edge of the couch. My pulse quickened. "Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "is there something you want to talk about?" He paused, then shook his head. "No, nothing," he replied, but the hesitation in his voice told a different story. I began noticing how he would watch me when he thought I wasn't looking. During dinner, while I cooked, even as I sipped my morning coffee. It wasn't just the frequency of his attention but the way it felt, loaded with unspoken words and emotions that seemed to press against the air between us. The tension reached a new height one afternoon when I was in the garden watering the plants. Alex walked out, a faint smile on his face. "You always look so peaceful out here," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that felt disarming. "Thanks," I replied, trying to keep things light. It's my little escape. He stood there for a moment, watching me. Then, as if gathering courage, he said, Lisa, I feel like I can tell you anything. You're the only person who really understands me. His words left me speechless. I wanted to believe his intentions were pure, that he simply needed someone to confide in. But the way he looked at me, the intensity, the softness, made me question everything. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, doubts and questions swirled in my mind. Was I imagining things, or was there something more to Alex's behavior? And if there was, how had we gotten here? The cracks in my once structured life were beginning to widen, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. The air in the house had grown heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that neither Alex nor I could ignore. Each interaction felt layered, as if words alone were inadequate to express the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. I tried to rationalize his behavior as a phase, a teenager seeking connection, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The scent of roasted garlic filled the room as the soft hum of music played in the background. Alex entered quietly, his presence almost undetectable until he spoke. Need any help? He asked, his voice unusually gentle. Startled, I turned to see him standing closer than usual, his eyes scanning my face with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Sure, I replied, handing him a cutting board and a knife. You can slice the carrots. As he worked beside me, the silence between us felt almost deafening. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he was prolonging the moment. Occasionally, our hands brushed when we reached for the same utensil, and though I pulled away quickly, the lingering warmth of his touch stayed with me. Lisa, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I looked up, noticing how his voice trembled slightly. Can I ask you something? Of course, I replied, trying to sound casual despite the unease stirring within me. Do you ever feel like you're missing something? Like there's more to life than what we're told to expect? His eyes locked onto mine, searching for something deeper than my words could provide. His question caught me off guard. I think everyone feels that way sometimes, I said cautiously, but it's important to focus on what truly matters, the relationships that ground us. He nodded, but his expression didn't change. You're different, Lisa. You're not like anyone else I know. You make me feel alive. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alex, I began, choosing my words carefully, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's important to keep things in perspective. We're family, and that's what matters most. He looked down, his face a mix of frustration and vulnerability. I know, he said softly, but sometimes I can't help how I feel. That night, I replayed the conversation in my head, dissecting every word, every glance. His feelings were becoming harder to ignore, and my resolve to maintain boundaries felt increasingly fragile. The following evening, we decided to watch a movie together. A comedy, something lighthearted to ease the tension. As the film played, Alex sat closer than usual, his arm resting on the back of the couch behind me. I tried to focus on the screen, but his proximity was distracting. At one point, I felt his hand lightly graze my shoulder, a touch so brief it could have been accidental. But when I glanced at him, the look in his eyes told me otherwise. Alex, I said softly, turning to face him, is everything okay? He hesitated before answering. Being around you, it's different. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel connected to you in a way I've never felt with anyone else. His words sent a jolt through me. I knew I had to address this carefully, to defuse the situation without pushing him away. Alex, it's natural to feel close to family members, especially when we spend time together. But you need to understand the importance of boundaries. It's what keeps relationships healthy. He nodded slowly, but the conflicted look in his eyes remained. You're right, he said, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. The apology felt genuine, yet it did little to alleviate the tension. As the days went on, our interactions became a delicate dance, each step laden with unspoken emotions. Alex would find small ways to be near me, to engage in conversations that felt deeper than they needed to be. And though I tried to maintain a firm stance, I couldn't deny the growing complexity of my own feelings. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden sipping coffee, Alex leaned forward and placed his hand on mine. Lisa, you mean so much to me, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't know what I'd do without you. I gently pulled my hand away, offering him a warm but firm smile. Alex, I care about you too, but we need to keep things in the right perspective. Our bond is special because we're family, and that's what makes it meaningful. He nodded, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. As we sat there in the golden light of the setting sun, I realized that this situation was far more complicated than I had anticipated. The boundaries I had set were clear, but the emotions they sought to contain were anything but. The turning point came on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air is heavy with the scent of fallen leaves, and the sky glows with the remnants of a golden sunset. I was in the living room, flipping through a magazine, when Alex walked in. There was something different about him, an energy, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "Lisa," he said, his tone steady but layered with emotion. "We need to talk." I put the magazine down and looked at him, a faint sense of dread creeping in. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "What's on your mind?" He sat down on the couch, closer than usual, his hands fidgeting slightly as he searched for the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about boundaries and family, and I need to be honest with you." My heart sank. I knew where this was headed, but I wasn't sure how to navigate it. "Go on," I said gently, bracing myself. Alex took a deep breath and met my gaze. "I've tried to push these feelings away, but I can't. I don't see you the way a stepson is supposed to see his stepmother. You're not just family to me, you're something more." His words landed like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile balance I had been trying to maintain. For a moment I couldn't speak, the weight of his confession pressing down on me. "Alex," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I understand that emotions can be confusing, especially at your age. But what you're feeling isn't appropriate. We need to focus on the relationship we already have, a bond that's built on trust and respect." He shook his head, frustration flashing in his eyes. "It's not just a phase, Lisa. I know how I feel, and I can't pretend it's not real." I stood up, needing to put some distance between us. "Alex, I care about you deeply, but this can't happen. You're like a son to me, and crossing this line would hurt both of us, and the family." For a moment he sat there in silence, his expression a mix of hurt and determination. Then, as if compelled by some unseen force, he stood and closed the gap between us. "I don't want to hurt you, Lisa," he said softly, his voice trembling. "But I need you to know how much you mean to me." Before I could react, he reached out and gently touched my arm, his fingers lingering in a way that sent a ripple of unease through me. "Alex," I said firmly, pulling away, "this stops now. You're young, and these feelings will pass. What matters is that we handle this with maturity and respect." His face fell, and for a moment he looked like a lost child. "I'm sorry," he whispered, stepping back. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you." The apology felt sincere, but it did little to ease the tension. I spent the rest of the evening in my room, replaying the conversation in my mind. How had we reached this point? What could I have done differently? The lines between right and wrong, family and something more, had blurred in ways I never thought possible. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to put the events of the previous night behind me. I busied myself in the kitchen, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables offering a small sense of normalcy. But when Alex entered the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. "Good morning," he said, his voice hesitant. "Morning," I replied without looking up, focusing on the task at hand. He hesitated near the doorway, then stepped closer. "Lisa, about last night, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cross a line." I turned to face him, my expression soft but firm. "Alex, I appreciate the apology, but we need to move forward. This situation is difficult for both of us, but it's important that we maintain boundaries." He nodded, but the conflict in his eyes was unmistakable. "I understand," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. The rest of the day passed in a blur, the tension between us palpable but unspoken. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the weight of everything hung heavy in the air. Jack, oblivious to the undercurrents, chatted about work and the car he was fixing in the garage. Alex barely spoke, his eyes occasionally flicking toward me but quickly looking away. After dinner, I retreated to the garden for some fresh air, hoping to clear my head. The cool breeze was a welcome relief, but my thoughts remained tangled. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Alex approaching. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tentative. I sighed, nodding. "Okay, but just for a moment." We sat on the bench, the faint glow of the porch light casting long shadows across the yard. "Lisa," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. These feelings are confusing, and I don't want to hurt you, or anyone else." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the gravity of the situation. "Thank you for understanding, Alex. It's not easy, but we'll get through this together." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I just need time to sort things out." And I hope we can still be close, just not in the way I was thinking. I placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. We'll figure it out, Alex. What matters is that we're honest and respectful with each other. As the days turned into weeks, the tension began to ease. Alex kept his distance, focusing more on his studies and spending time with friends. Our interactions became more natural, the heaviness of that autumn evening gradually lifting. But the memory of it remained, a reminder of how fragile and complex human emotions can be. In the end, we found a way to move forward, rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of understanding and trust. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary, for both of us. The days following Alex's confession were marked by an uneasy calm. On the surface, life seemed to return to normal. Dinners were shared, conversations were polite, and routines resumed. But beneath the surface, the weight of what had transpired lingered, casting a shadow over every interaction. I couldn't shake the memory of his words, the vulnerability in his voice, and the intensity of his gaze. It was as if the house itself had absorbed the tension, making it impossible to truly move on. Alex tried to maintain his distance, but the effort was evident. He avoided spending too much time in the same room as me, retreating to his room or going out with friends more often than before. When we did interact, his demeanor was polite but reserved, as though he was carefully guarding his emotions. I appreciated his effort to respect the boundaries we had discussed, but I also saw the toll it was taking on him. Jack, blissfully unaware of the turmoil within the house, continued his usual routine. His long hours in the garage and late nights at work left him oblivious to the subtle shifts in our family dynamic. Part of me felt relieved that he didn't notice. How could I possibly explain what had happened without causing irreparable damage? But another part of me resented the emotional distance that had allowed this situation to unfold in the first place. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, Alex joined me unexpectedly. He sat at the far end of the couch, keeping a safe distance, and for a moment, we simply watched the television in silence. Finally, he spoke. "Lisa, I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I realize now how unfair I've been to you. And to myself." I turned to face him, surprised by his candor. "Alex, it's okay to feel confused sometimes. What matters is how we move forward." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I let my emotions get the better of me, and I put you in a position you didn't deserve. I'm sorry for that." His apology was sincere, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. "Thank you, Alex. That means a lot to me," I said softly. "What's important is that we both learn from this and grow." As the days turned into weeks, Alex began to make noticeable changes. He threw himself into his studies, joined a local sports club, and reconnected with old friends. These activities seemed to provide him with the distraction and structure he needed, and I was glad to see him regaining a sense of normalcy. His smile became more genuine, and the lingering tension in his eyes slowly faded. For me, however, the aftermath was more complicated. I couldn't stop questioning myself, wondering if I had missed the warning signs or handled the situation poorly. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would replay the events in my mind, dissecting every word and action. The guilt was overwhelming at times, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I felt responsible for the emotional turmoil Alex had experienced. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the kitchen, Jack came in, wiping grease from his hands. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone light but curious. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Just a lot on my mind," I replied vaguely, avoiding his gaze. He nodded, accepting my answer without pressing further. His casual dismissal stung, a reminder of the emotional gap between us. In many ways, Jack's absence, both physical and emotional, had created the space for Alex's feelings to grow unchecked. It wasn't entirely his fault, but the realization made me yearn for a deeper connection with him, one that could strengthen the foundation of our family. As time passed, the house began to feel lighter. Alex and I found a new rhythm, one built on mutual respect and clearer boundaries. We still shared moments of conversation and laughter, but the emotional undercurrents that had once threatened to pull us under were gone. He seemed more at peace, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose in fostering a healthy and supportive environment for him. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Alex looked at me and said, "Thank you, Lisa, for everything. I know I've made things difficult, but you've been so patient and understanding. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." His words brought tears to my eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Alex," I replied. And I'm proud of the progress you've made. Jack, oblivious to the deeper meaning behind our exchange, simply smiled and continued eating. It was a small moment, but it felt like a turning point, a sign that we had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Jack, making an effort to communicate more openly and spend quality time together. Slowly, the distance between us began to shrink, and I felt hopeful for the future of our marriage. Alex, too, continued to grow and mature, channeling his energy into positive pursuits and building a brighter path for himself. The experience had been a painful one for both of us, but it had also taught us valuable lessons about the complexity of human emotions and the importance of boundaries. Life was far from perfect, but it was moving forward, and for that I was grateful. Months passed, and life finally seemed to settle into a new rhythm. The heaviness that once lingered in the house began to lift, replaced by a sense of cautious peace. Alex had transformed remarkably. He was more engaged with his studies, thriving socially, and seemed to have found a healthier balance in his emotions. Watching him rebuild himself piece by piece filled me with pride and relief. For me, the journey had been deeply reflective. The ordeal had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and the cracks in my marriage with Jack. While Alex's emotions had been the catalyst for this introspection, the truth was that the emotional distance in my relationship with Jack had created fertile ground for these complications. It became clear that we had both been neglecting the foundation of our relationship for far too long. I began to make a conscious effort to reconnect with Jack. I shared more of my thoughts and feelings, even the ones I had previously kept bottled up out of fear of burdening him. Slowly but surely, he responded in kind. The late-night conversations we had once cherished made a reappearance, and the shared moments of laughter and understanding reminded me of why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Alex and I also found a way to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy at first. Every interaction was laced with unspoken caution, each word measured to avoid reopening old wounds. But as time went on, we found a new equilibrium. Our relationship, though forever changed, became one of mutual respect and understanding. I learned to see him not just as my stepson, but as a young man navigating the complexities of life, while he began to view me as a source of support rather than something unattainable. The experience also taught me an invaluable lesson about boundaries. As adults, it's easy to underestimate the impact we have on younger individuals who look up to us. Our actions, words, and even unintentional gestures can carry immense weight. Being mindful of that power is essential, not just for their well-being, but for our own integrity as well. Reflecting on everything, I realized that the true takeaway from this experience was the importance of connection. In our increasingly busy lives, it's all too easy to lose sight of the relationships that matter most. Alex's loneliness, Jack's emotional absence, and my own restlessness were all symptoms of the same underlying problem: a lack of genuine, meaningful connection. As a family, we made a commitment to change that. Weekly dinners became sacred, technology-free zones where we could focus on each other. Jack and I started taking small weekend trips to reignite our bond, and Alex began opening up about his dreams and goals for the future. The steps were small, but they were significant, each one a brick in the rebuilding of our family's foundation. Though the experience had been painful and fraught with complexity, I couldn't deny that it had also been transformative. It had forced us to face uncomfortable truths and to grow in ways we might never have otherwise. Life doesn't offer easy solutions or clear-cut answers, but it does offer opportunities to learn, and this was one of them. As I sat in the garden one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. The journey had been tumultuous, but it had also brought clarity and growth. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I felt equipped to face them with a renewed sense of purpose and resilience. Because at the heart of it all, life is about the connections we nurture, the boundaries we respect, and the lessons we carry forward. And in the end, those are the things that truly define us. If you were in Lisa's position, how would you handle such a complex situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more emotional and thought-provoking stories. There's always more to uncover, and we'd love to have you with us on this journey. Stay tuned. Our next story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about relationships.